really happy to be here with you all tonight. This is really special for me to have a chance to share with so many people who believe in this struggle, believe in this cause. I'm here as part of the National Boricua Human Rights Network. We are headquartered in Chicago. We have chapters in several cities, including Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Connecticut, Philadelphia, Cleveland, and several other cities. We basically are doing work for the release of Puerto Rican political prisoner Oscar Lopez Rivera, who is this May 29th marks 31 years that he's been in prison. And it's just unacceptable. And we're going to relentlessly keep going until we have him home like the rest of our compañeros. Fortunately for us, we have a little bit of experience in terms of the campaign for release of political prisoners. Our first successful release was in '79 with the presidential pardon by President Jimmy Carter, with the release of the Puerto Rican nationalists who attacked Congress in 1954. That was a 25-year campaign for their release. Our next successful release was in 1999 with the clemency by President Clinton, and there were 11 compañeros who were released then. The most recent release was in 2010, and I'm very, very proud to have lived that historical moment with compañeros that are right here in the room: Dan, Lane, Sarah, Dana, and other folks who are here. And I just want to explain to you a little bit about how that release happened for Carlos Alberto. He was not offered a release by President Clinton in '99. The sentences that they were all given, all the compañeros, were arbitrary. But we campaigned for a unified release of all of them. But the release didn't happen exactly the way we wanted it. They were each given their individual conditions for release. Carlos Alberto was not offered a release for reasons that haven't been revealed to us by the government. Though, we suspect that they really believed that he was a leader of the FALN, the Fuerzas Armadas de Liberación Nacional, or the National Armed Forces for Liberation, which was an underground guerrilla organization attacking the U.S. government for independence for Puerto Rico. It was not the first time that the U.S. government had been attacked by Puerto Ricans on their own soil, but they do recognize the work that the FALN was doing as very, very dangerous for the U.S. The question of U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico, it's an age-old question at this point, but quite interestingly, it's still very much disguised and invisible, even to the Puerto Rican community here in the United States. In Puerto Rico, we've done a lot of work for the campaign for Oscar. Right now, there's a unified civil movement for Oscar's release. Recently, President Obama was there. He was there for 4 hours on the island, and we created such a presence of Oscar in his face, he couldn't turn any corner without seeing a picture. In 4 hours that he was there, 3 major interviews that were done to him, 3 questions were posed to him, and a question at each of those 3 important interviews were posed to Obama regarding Oscar's release. And he came up with some lame excuse like, he has to follow the proper protocols. There was an application for parole that was submitted, but it wasn't submitted by him, and just technical stuff. So, but with that, Carlos Alberto, fortunately, came out in 2010. He kind of flew under the right wing's radar. For that parole hearing, there's no cookie cutter approach to any of this, and it has to be a dialectic process of, what works today may not work tomorrow, may not work 6 hours from now, and the movement is organic, and so we have to always make room for consideration for that subjective factor, right? that straw that's going to break this camel's back, right? So for Carlos, it flew that parole hearing flew under the radar. We didn't campaign for that. We just kind of laid low for that, which actually worked for us because the right wing, the red flags were not raised, and he actually was released, and we were able to prove to the parole commission that, all the other compañeros that were released in '99 were a part of civil society, and that Carlos Alberto had a safe haven to go to in Puerto Rico and be embraced by the community. And so he was released. With the case of Oscar, it was not the same, and I'm not sure if Dan was able to cover any of this, but recently he had a parole hearing in January. It was a complete and total fiasco. It was a farce. They made a joke out of him. The parole commission clowned him and his attorney, Jan Sussler. He was, and I didn't realize this until then, but when you go to the parole commission and request parole, it's not actually a legal proceeding that is monitored by any sort of like rules of law. So, they can slap you up, kick your ass, do whatever they want, and, you have no recourse. So, for Oscar, it was an embarrassment for him. They took him out of his cell, shackled his arms, his legs, and, the whole nine. Got him, when they presented him to the parole commission, that's how they presented him in his jumpsuit with his legs shackled and his hands shackled. They also brought in several witnesses. This is the right wing. The FBI did a great job organizing against this. They brought several witnesses from the Francis Tavern incident in New York City, which was really unfair to Oscar because he was never charged with any crime associated with the Francis Tavern incident. This was just them really stretching, and they brought family members of folks who were injured in that incident to testify against Oscar. Oscar was never charged with any crime that had to do with that. Believe me, if there were any shred of evidence that the U.S. government had for that incident, they would have slapped him with those charges. So we thought that was, really unfair, and he was basically told, come back in 15 years, and we'll see what we can do. Now this is unfortunate because Oscar was offered a release in 1999. He refused that release for very principled reasons. Because the sentences that they were given were arbitrary, and the release that they were given was also arbitrary. He felt uncomfortable accepting that release because there were several compañeros who were not offered a release who would still have had remained in prison. Amongst them, Carlos Alberto Torres, who we got out last year as it flew under the parole commission's radar. So, Oscar is... Oscar deserves to come out. I mean, at this point, we have tried every angle with his campaign, the human rights angle, the disproportionate sentences. And again, it's an organic movement. And so we have to be really creative about how we construct this campaign and the message that we bring to Obama. In Puerto Rico, we've done a really good job, right, of everyone knows who Oscar is. His face is known. We've been able to elevate the campaign there to a really massive level. Here in the United States, unfortunately, since the '99 release and the Vieques victory, where the Navy was forced to leave, there's been a lull in the movement. And so, it's like a whole new generation of young people that are struggling. I was just in Chicago last weekend for a national meeting, and out of this revolutionary work, a group of youth over there started a youth space, and the young lady who's running it is 22 now. She says, when you guys opened this, I was 12. There's a whole nother generation of people. For us Puerto Ricans, it's very difficult because, there's no massive mode of media communications for us to get this, for us to sort of like really get this message to the level that we want it. But we're working towards that. We met with Obama before he began campaigning for his first term, and he understands the Chicago community. He understands Oscar's case. He knows it very clearly. He's very aware of the work that happens in this campaign and in the Chicago community. And, you know, he basically told us, you know, if you create the conditions, you know, how could I refuse if you create the conditions? And what does that mean? Well, you know, in 1999 for that release, it was incredible, the kind of international support. President Clinton couldn't turn anywhere without hearing about it. You know, we mobilized the Puerto Rican community here in the U.S. We mobilized the Puerto Rican community on the island. We mobilized radical revolutionary sectors of the United States. You know, we had a petition that was signed by international figures like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela. I mean, you know, Mother Teresa signed our last petition in '99. But we need to bring the campaign to that kind of level of support. And education is really key for that, you know, and it's like it's like an unending push to educate people, because the question of colonialism and U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico is so silenced. That is the Achilles heel of the United States. And it's a shameful history that they really want to hide. This week, Adolfo Matos, a former prisoner who was a political prisoner that was released in '99, was here in Philadelphia. We did a series of, well, we didn't hold a public event with him. He was here to do some educational work with a group of students. And so he did some copper etching artwork with the students, but they were learning about the figure of Juan Antonio Corregel. All of this is in our effort. You know, we really recognize this thing of education as so key. So he comes here, and through his art, he's making revolution. And through that teaching, you know, it's such a teachable moment for these students. We taught them about the figure of Juan Antonio Corregel. And Corregel is really important to our history. He's one of the most silenced figures in our history. And I think that his work really speaks to a lot of what folks talked about here tonight. I think a big problem, I know for sure, you know, one of the biggest issues in Puerto Rico is this question of reformism, and also here in the Puerto Rican community. And this struggle between revolution and reform. And I think that that's really important to recognize, because it's the tactic that the U.S. government has taken to maintaining its colonial domination over Puerto Rico. It takes the victories that our revolutionary peoples have made, it co-opts those victories, and it transmutes them into this reformist tendency that they then feed to the people. And, you know, the revolutionary figures that we have, you know, they never failed us. The revolution in Puerto Rico, like, it's funny because in the activity there was a sister that came up, and she was probably close to my age, and she was crying, and she said, like, you know, how come I never knew about this? Who, you know, like, how come nobody told me about this? She grew up right here in North Philly. And she says, I have children that need to know about this. And she just started crying. So it's important to still teach this, you know. And so she asked me, you know, how come with all this, you know, revolutionary work, Puerto Rico is still not free? And so how do you answer that question? How do I answer to my daughter here, you know, how come Puerto Rico is still not free? Well, you know, it's not the revolution that failed us. It's individuals, reformist individuals who are overcome by greed, by egoism, and by the desire for capital, for titles, for positions. And when I look back at the leadership that I've seen here in Philadelphia and in the Puerto Rican community in the U.S., there are so few of those folks who were part of that revolutionary tendency from the 50s, from the 60s, from the 70s, from the 80s that I see now who are complete reformists. It's you know, it's really spooky and really scary. But this struggle between revolution and reformism, I think, is really important. And when we teach that history, there's so much of it, you know, so much of the history of Puerto Rico is just masked over by this reformist tendency that the U.S. implemented in Puerto Rico and in our communities. And so I think that that's one of the important points that I want to make tonight is, like, you know, that we really need to teach our young people that our movements have never failed us. Our revolutionary figures have never failed us. It's reformism that has failed us. And folks who who, whose idea of a future for our people is not a humanistic, a humanistic world that they plan for us. And we're wondering, like, do we want to put videos on YouTube that people want to comment on? Is this good? Is this bad? I mean, and it's something just so small as that could be really, really important. Do we want to put our petitions on the internet, on things like, cause.org or moveon. And looking at those what's been successful, what's worked, what's helped policy change, how much do we leave ourselves open to backlash and this sort of question. But none of these questions are easy, and there's no cookie cutter approach. It takes like an immense amount of discipline and meeting and really just hashing it out and having a sense of compañerismo, right? That you're my compañero, and how do we work this? I want to say I feel that sense of compañerismo here, and I'm really happy and honored to be here for David's book signing. For me, I'm born and raised right here in Philadelphia, homegrown, and I remember when I came to my epiphany and was revolutionized, and one of the first questions that I thought of was, well, are there any white people that ever struggled? I mean, I just didn't know. It just was sheer ignorance. And I got to tell you, like Teresa was saying, I mean, I was just blown away when I found out about Weather Underground, and that there were folks, that John Brown was not the only one, that there was somebody in this century that was struggling. And I'm really proud to be here today and to be a part of the continuation of that struggle. Thank you.